She said, "I'm a United States Army general." They cuffed her anyway. What happened next ended 2 careers and rattled an entire police department. It unfolded in under 2 minutes. General Martha Ellison, 67 years old, had just parked her Buick on the 3rd level of the Jefferson Tower garage off Clarendon Boulevard in Arlington. She had wrapped up a closed-door briefing at the Defense Department Annex across the street. Rain was still sliding off her old raincoat as she reached into her pocket for her keys. Her face carried the kind of tired calm that comes from decades of responsibility, still replaying in her head the last moments of that strategy session. Then footsteps, fast, heavy. "Hands where I can see them," a man barked. Martha turned slowly. 2 uniformed officers were advancing, guns drawn, flashlights glaring into her eyes. One was tall, red-faced, breathing hard. The other was younger, jittery, his jaw twitching. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," the younger one shouted. Martha raised her hands. "Officers, Don't move," the taller one snapped. "We got a call about somebody messing with cars. You fit the description." She blinked. "This is my car. My name is General Martha Ellison. I just came from—" "Back against the wall. Now." There was no pause, no check, no request for ID, just motion. The tall officer rushed in, yanked her wrist, twisted it behind her back. Her leather satchel hit the concrete with a dull thud. Her service ring scraped against the pillar as her other arm was pinned. She grimaced but made no sound. "Is this really happening?" she murmured. Not to them, but to herself. She didn't resist, didn't raise her voice. She stood silent as the cuffs bit into her wrists. Her Pentagon badge slid out of her coat pocket and landed at the officer's boot, the name and clearance barcode plain as day. He didn't look. "Sir, I'm a United States Army general. I'm unarmed. I'm not resisting. You need to verify my ID," she said steadily. "Save it," the young officer muttered. "Folks like you think you can talk your way out of anything." She turned her head, looked him square in the eyes. "Folks like me? What exactly do you mean by that?" He didn't answer. The tall one rummaged through her satchel. "What's this? Some kind of encrypted gear?" "My military laptop," she said evenly. "It's serialized, barcode inside the flap." They didn't check. They kept digging, convinced they were the authority in that garage. Martha stayed quiet, but inside, something heavy settled in. Not fear, recognition. She knew exactly why this was happening. "This isn't just a misunderstanding," she said quietly. "This is a mistake with real consequences." The younger cop scoffed. "Lady, you're not in a position to hand out warnings." She didn't argue. She shifted her wrist, pressed a hidden button on her smartwatch. 1 second, 2. A faint vibration confirmed the alert. A direct ping to the Joint Command Office at the Pentagon. Her location, her ID, everything. "You've got less than 10 minutes to figure out who I am," she said calmly. The tall officer sneered. "Excuse me? I said you have 10 minutes before this garage gets very crowded." But they kept pawing through her bag, blind to the weight of what they'd just set in motion. To understand how wrong they were, you need to know who Martha Ellison really is. Not just a badge, not just the words, Army General. She grew up in a shotgun house on the outskirts of Clarksdale, Mississippi. Her granddaddy used to call it the Black Wall Street nobody ever wrote about. Her mama worked double shifts as a nurse. Her daddy fixed air conditioners and prayed every night his children would never have to wear a uniform unless they wanted to. Martha wanted to. She saw a world tilted by injustice and made up her mind to know the rules better than anyone. ROTC carried her out of Mississippi. She went from Jackson State to Fort Benning, and from there her career caught fire. Strategic, sharp, fluent in 2 languages. She never once asked for favors as a black woman in a field where women, especially black women, seldom rose past the middle ranks. By 42, she had commanded operations overseas. By 55, she was briefing presidents. She had seen combat, earned decorations, faced losses, but none of it shielded her from moments like this. That very morning, she had briefed senior leaders on cyber defense at the Pentagon Annex. One of only 3 generals in the room, and the only black person. She had worn her full dress uniform inside. Afterward, she pulled on a hoodie and slacks for the ride home. She wasn't seeking attention. Just her car, just some quiet. But in that damp garage, with guns in her face and cuffs biting into her wrists, none of that mattered. They didn't see a general. They saw a threat. And Martha Ellison, at 67 years old, wasn't even surprised. The metal bit into her wrists with an unforgiving chill, the kind of pressure that reminded Martha Ellison of long-ago training drills where instructors barked orders to resist pain, control your breathing. She had mastered those lessons at 21, back when Fort Benning still reeked of sweat, red dirt, and green recruits who had no idea how much the world was about to demand of them. But now, at 67, the pain in her joints wasn't hypothetical. It was real, sharp, and humiliating. She leaned her cheek against the concrete pillar, cold damp seeping into her skin. Rainwater dripped down from the garage ceiling, carrying with it the faint scent of oil and exhaust. The fluorescent lights above flickered, buzzing like tired insects. This was no battlefield, no desert, no foreign command center. It was a parking garage 2 blocks from where she had spent the last 4 hours briefing senior officials about cyber defense. A briefing so classified, her notes couldn't leave the room. And yet here she was, treated like a criminal, with her laptop bag half open on the dirty concrete floor, her wrists locked tight, her dignity pressed flat against the stone. Her body was restrained, but her mind was free, racing, calculating, cataloging every detail. The years had taught her that panic served no one. Panic got people killed. Strategy, on the other hand, could still win a fight. Even this kind of fight. How close are we to Arlington Dispatch? She asked herself, her inner voice calm, measured. From memory, she knew the precinct was only 3 blocks away, less than a 5-minute drive if traffic was light. If they called it in already, backup could be here soon, but not backup for me. Backup for them. That mattered. Are these Arlington PD? Or a private security contract tied to the building? The uniforms looked official, but she knew well enough that many official uniforms around D.C. weren't always what they seemed. Too many private companies had bought up old squad cars, slapped on badges that confused the public, and handed authority to men who had no idea what federal jurisdiction meant. It wasn't the first time she'd asked herself if the person holding the weapon knew what the law actually said. She shifted her weight slightly, enough to feel the chain of the cuffs rattle. Both officers had guns drawn, but now their attention drifted toward her bag, her military-issued laptop with encrypted defense protocols she had no intention of letting strangers poke around in. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and reminded herself, don't give them anything, not fear, not anger, nothing they can twist. Then, she felt it. A faint pulse against her wrist. Her smartwatch vibrated twice, soft and controlled. She'd tapped the emergency sequence moments earlier when one of the officers leaned in too close, too smug, too sure of his authority. Now, the confirmation light blinked green. The signal had gone out. Somewhere inside the Pentagon's communications wing, a liaison officer had just received her location, her identification, her emergency flag. Someone was watching, someone was listening. Help was on its way. That knowledge was enough to keep her steady. But the 2 men in front of her didn't know what that meant. To them, she was still just an old black woman in a hoodie standing next to a black SUV in a half-empty garage. Suspicious enough, easy enough to handle. "What's a woman like you doing down here anyway?" the tall one asked, his voice coated with arrogance. His red face glistened with sweat, though the garage was cool. He spoke like a man who'd spent a career puffing out his chest to make up for the insecurity he couldn't admit. "You casing vehicles?" he added, lips curling into a smug grin. Martha turned her head slowly, keeping her voice even. "You should stop talking," he chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. "Oh, is that a threat?" "No," she said, locking eyes with him. "It's advice. You're going to regret every word coming out of your mouth." The younger one, Lang, she caught from the badge, shifted his stance. Nervous. His jaw twitched. He was the type who followed orders but still second-guessed himself. The type who could have stopped this but wouldn't, not unless someone stronger told him to. The cuffs dug deeper as the taller one, Maddox, tightened them just a little more, as though reminding her who was in charge. She let him. Pain was temporary. Documentation was permanent. Inside her head, the checklist continued. Body cams, radios, garage cameras, Pentagon alert. Each piece mattered. Each piece would be part of the aftermath. And Martha Ellison, who had outlasted war zones and political storms, knew that aftermath was where wars were truly won. "You know what else always trips people up?" she asked, her tone still calm, still firm. Maddox raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Body cams." That hit. She saw it in Lang's eyes before he even spoke. "Sarge, are our cams rolling?" Maddox shot him a look sharp enough to cut steel. "Of course they are. Standard protocol." Martha stared straight ahead. "Good. Then the Pentagon won't have to pull surveillance footage alone. Your own department's audio will be part of the report." The silence that followed was heavier than the cuffs. Lang's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. Maddox's smirk faltered. Just a fraction. For the first time since this began, the balance shifted. Not in her favor yet, but no longer entirely against her either. Doubt had entered the room. And once doubt creeps in, it spreads like fire through dry grass. Maddox tried to laugh it off. "Lady says a lot of things." Martha didn't flinch, didn't blink. She simply let her truth hang in the stale air of the garage. Undeniable, unshakable. "I was the commanding officer on Operation Bronze Drift," she said, voice low but clear. "I've briefed 2 presidents. There are exactly 4 people in this state with access to the information I carry on that laptop. 2 of them are secretaries of defense." Lang froze. His lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. His eyes darted between her, the cuffs, the laptop, and Maddox, who suddenly seemed less certain. Maddox tried again, but his voice lacked its earlier strength. "You think we're supposed to believe that?" Martha turned her head, met his eyes directly. "Number, I don't care if you believe it. I care that you touched my property without probable cause, detained me without identifying yourselves, and failed to confirm identity. I care that you just assaulted a sitting United States Army general inside a federal facility." Lang's breathing grew shallow. His face was pale now. "Sarge," he whispered, "maybe we should check her ID again." "Don't get soft on me," Maddox snapped, pride rising like a wall he couldn't climb down from. "She's bluffing." Martha didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because she heard it first, faint, deliberate footsteps at the far end of the garage. Not the sloppy echo of night wanderers, not the heavy stomp of overconfident officers. These steps were measured, precise, the kind drilled into men who'd spent years walking into classified spaces where silence and presence carried more weight than words. 3 suits appeared under the dim light, their movements brisk, eyes scanning. Behind them, 2 uniformed military police escorted a dark SUV with tinted windows, its engine idling low. Martha shifted just enough to exhale. "Took them long enough," she whispered. Lang stiffened, color draining from his face. Maddox straightened, but the confidence was gone now, replaced by something closer to fear. He might have been a veteran of street patrols, but he'd never squared off against federal authority arriving in full force. One of the suits lifted a badge. His voice echoed across the garage. "Special Agent Colin Red, Department of Defense. Step away from the detainee immediately." For the first time since they laid hands on her, Martha felt the cuffs loosen. The click of the key echoed like freedom. Her wrists throbbed, skin red and raw, but her eyes never left Maddox's face. It wasn't anger she gave him. It wasn't even contempt. It was something sharper, more cutting, The knowledge that every second of this moment was documented, sealed, and irreversible. Control was no longer his. Control had never been his. And Martha Ellison, 67 years old, battle-tested and unbreakable, had just reminded him of what real authority looks like. Sergeant Blake Maddox had been wearing a badge longer than Officer Trevor Lang had been shaving. 15 years on the Arlington force, a dozen commendations, 2 suspensions he never talked about, and a reputation among younger cops for being the kind of man you didn't cross if you wanted an easy shift. He walked with a chest-out swagger, the kind of strut that said, "I own this beat," even when he didn't. Maddox had built his whole career on instinct. He told rookies that gut feelings were what separated a good cop from a dead one. He didn't read reports carefully, didn't waste time on procedure, didn't like overthinking. In his mind, procedure was for lawyers and academics. The street required something else, fast judgment, authority that came quick and hard. And if that judgment was wrong, well, you made the paperwork fit later. Lang, meanwhile, was on his second year. 29, a wife at home, a baby on the way in November. He joined the force with every intention of being the kind of officer who served and protected the right way. He'd even told his academy classmates he wanted to be a bridge between police and the community. But out here, riding next to Maddox night after night, he had learned the truth. It wasn't principles that kept you alive on patrol. It was loyalty. Loyalty to your partner, loyalty to the unwritten rules of the squad, loyalty to silence. Still, Lang's conscience hadn't been beaten down entirely. He felt it now, twisting in his gut as he watched the older man press a U.S. Army general into the cold concrete like she was a petty thief. Lang had seen plenty of suspects try to talk their way out of trouble, but something about this woman was different. Her voice was steady, her words exact, her eyes unwavering. She didn't sound like someone bluffing to avoid a ticket. She sounded like someone used to giving orders in rooms where men like Maddox would never be allowed to stand. "Run the plates," Lang muttered, fumbling with his radio. That was the safe move, the logical step. Confirm the vehicle, check registration, maybe avoid making a mistake that could haunt them both. But Maddox waved him off with a flick of his wrist. "Nah, if she's lying, she'll trip up. They always do." Lang swallowed hard. That phrase, "they always do," was one Maddox used often, tossed around like gospel truth. They meant suspects, outsiders, people who didn't fit the picture Maddox had in his head. Tonight, they meant a 67-year-old black woman in a hoodie standing beside a government-issued SUV. The cuffs clinked as she shifted slightly, her eyes fixed straight ahead, not pleading, not breaking. "You know what else always trips people up?" she said, her voice calm, deliberate. Maddox sneered. "What's that?" "Body cams." The words landed like a crack of thunder. Lang's stomach dropped. He glanced down at the camera clipped to his vest. Yes, the red light was blinking. Recording? He'd forgotten about it in the chaos, but she hadn't. She'd remembered everything. Lang cleared his throat. "Sarge, are our cams rolling?" Maddox shot him a glare sharp enough to slice him in half. "Of course they are. Standard protocol." The general didn't move, didn't flinch. "Good," she said evenly. "Then the Pentagon won't have to pull surveillance footage alone. Your own department's audio will be part of the report." Lang's pulse hammered in his neck. The Pentagon? He thought. Did she really just say Pentagon? He wanted to ask Maddox, wanted to say, maybe we should double-check, but the words stuck like stones in his throat. Maddox laughed, but the sound was hollow now, thinner than it had been 5 minutes earlier. "Lady says a lot of things," he muttered, like a man trying to convince himself more than anyone else. But the woman didn't back down. Her voice came low, steady, the cadence of someone used to speaking in secure rooms where a single wrong word could shift national policy. "I was the commanding officer on Operation Bronze Drift. I've briefed 2 presidents. There are exactly 4 people in this state with access to the data I carry on that laptop. and 2 of them are secretaries of defense. Lang froze. He had never even heard of bronze drift, but the way she said it, like dropping a piece of stone into still water, told him it was real. Real enough that if she wasn't who she claimed, she was risking federal charges for impersonation. Real enough that his own badge suddenly felt flimsy against the weight of her words. "Sarge," Lang whispered, "maybe we should check her ID again." "Don't get soft on me," Maddox cut him off, voice sharp and angry. Pride oozed from every syllable. Maddox didn't like being challenged, not by rookies, not by women, and certainly not by suspects who looked him dead in the eye. He tightened his jaw, holding on to control with both fists. "She's bluffing." Lang wanted to push back, wanted to insist, but years of conditioning held him still. In the academy, they drilled chain of command. On patrol, they drilled back your partner, and in Maddox's car, they drilled never make the sergeant look weak. Lang knew if he pressed, if he spoke up now, Maddox would bury him in paperwork, humiliate him in front of the squad, maybe worse. But as he stood there, shifting uneasily under the fluorescent hum, Lang realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. Maddox wasn't afraid of being wrong. He was afraid of being humbled. And there was a difference. The general didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Her silence was a weapon sharper than any blade. She had already laid the facts on the table, already signaled her backup, already secured the evidence. Now she simply waited, like a seasoned chess master who knew the opponent's moves 3 steps ahead. Maddox tried to reclaim his authority, strutting in front of her, rifling through her laptop bag as though he might find something that proved him right. His fingers touched the smooth casing of her government-issued computer, the serial tags bright under the light. He muttered something under his breath about encrypted devices and probable cause, but even his partner could hear the cracks in his confidence. Lang felt sweat trickle down his back beneath the stiff Kevlar vest. He glanced at his own body cam again, the little red light blinking like a metronome. Every second was recorded, every word, every gesture. If she was who she said she was, if she really was a general, then this moment wasn't just a mistake. It was a career-ending disaster. For the first time since the call came in, Lang thought of his wife, her hand resting on the swell of her belly just last night as they folded baby clothes together. He thought of the tiny crib waiting in their apartment, the one they'd built on a Saturday afternoon while neighbors grilled burgers 2 doors down. He thought of what it would mean if he was tied to this, if his silence became complicity. Maddox, though, wasn't thinking about family or consequences. Maddox was thinking about pride, about how it would look if he backed down in front of a suspect, in front of his partner, in front of anyone who might hear the tape later. Pride was a drug, and Maddox was hooked. He couldn't let go, even as the evidence stacked against him. The air in the garage grew heavier, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic on Clarendon Boulevard. And in that silence, Lang finally realized the truth. They weren't in control anymore. She was. Then came the sound, faint, deliberate footsteps, echoing from the far end of the garage. Not the careless stomp of civilians, not the hurried jog of beat cops. These were different, precise, intentional. Lang turned, eyes wide. Maddox straightened, but his hands twitched nervously at his sides, and Martha Ellison, still cuffed to the pillar, allowed herself the smallest of smiles, so faint it was almost invisible. "Help's here," she murmured. The sound came first, leather soles against concrete, deliberate and steady, like a drumbeat announcing something inevitable. Not rushed, not frantic. Whoever was walking into that garage wasn't coming to check things out. They were coming to take control. Lang heard it before Maddox did. His head turned toward the echo, his throat suddenly dry. The fluorescent light flickered above them, casting long shadows across the painted lines of the garage floor. Maddox stiffened, his jaw tightening, but his eyes darted to the side, betraying the first real sign of unease. General Martha Ellison, still cuffed, still pressed against the concrete pillar, didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. She already knew what those footsteps meant. She'd spent decades recognizing the cadence of authority, the kind of walk that belonged to men and women who weren't afraid of being challenged. "Help's here," she whispered, just loud enough for Lang to hear. And then they appeared. 3 men in dark suits, moving with the precision of people who didn't waste effort. Their ties were tight, their jackets tailored, but it wasn't the clothes that announced who they were. It was the presence. They didn't fidget, didn't hesitate. They scanned, assessed, and advanced, as if every step was part of a prearranged plan. Behind them, 2 military police officers in crisp uniforms flanked a black SUV with tinted windows, its headlights cutting through the dim garage. The engine purred low, steady, like a beast waiting in the shadows. The tallest of the suits stopped 15 feet from Maddox and Lang. He lifted a badge with one hand, his voice echoing off the garage walls. "Special Agent Colin Red, Department of Defense. Step away from the detainee immediately." Lang's body reacted before his mind did. He stepped back so quickly he nearly tripped over the general's laptop bag. His face was pale, his hands trembling. Maddox didn't move. His pride wouldn't let him. Agent Red's eyes narrowed. "Sergeant, that was not a request." Still, Maddox held his ground. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His face flushed red, not from exertion, but from something far more dangerous. The realization that he was no longer the man in control. Martha finally lifted her head from the pillar. Her wrists ached, skin raw where the cuffs dug into bone. But her eyes were steady, calm, locked on Maddox. She didn't speak, didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Every second that ticked by drove the knife of reality deeper into him. Lang glanced at Maddox, then at Red, then back at Maddox again. His heart was hammering so loudly he swore they could all hear it. Finally, he whispered, "Sarge," but the word died in his throat. Agent Red motioned with a flick of his hand. One of the military police officers stepped forward, produced a key, and with a sharp, metallic click, the cuffs fell away. Martha exhaled slowly as she rubbed her wrists. The skin was red, bruised in thin rings where the metal had pressed too hard. She flexed her fingers, winced at the stiffness, but kept her eyes on Maddox. Red's voice dropped, calm but sharp. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "Not physically," Martha answered, her tone even. But Maddox was still standing there, frozen like a man staring at the edge of a cliff he hadn't seen until it was too late. Red turned his head. "Did she resist?" Lang shook his head quickly. "No, sir. She complied." "Did she raise her voice? Threaten you? Act aggressively?" Lang hesitated, then shook his head again. "No, sir." "Did she identify herself?" Lang swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir. She said she was a general." Red stepped closer, his presence heavy. "And you didn't think to verify that before putting hands on her?" Lang's eyes dropped to the floor. Maddox just stared straight ahead, as if trying to will himself invisible. Martha finally spoke, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. It was never about verification. It was about control. The words cut sharper than any accusation. Agent Red turned to her. "We're reviewing garage surveillance, ma'am. Cameras were rolling. The Pentagon's already been notified of the incident via your secure trigger." "I assumed that's why I sent it," Martha replied. Behind them, the military police retrieved her bag and phone from the ground. Martha nodded once. "I want a chain of custody established for everything they touched. Fingerprints, radio logs, dash cam, timestamps, audio records, all of it." "You'll have it," Red said without hesitation. "There's already a JAG officer en route." For the first time since the cuffs came off, Maddox spoke. His voice cracked, raw. This is some kind of joke, right?" Martha turned her eyes on him, calm and devastating. "You're right, it is a joke, except the punchline is your career." His lips moved, but no sound came out. Red gestured to the end of the garage. We'll be escorting General Ellison to the command vehicle now. Officers, remain here until Arlington PD's Internal Affairs Division arrives. Lang looked like a man about to faint. Wait, we're being investigated? You're being documented, Red replied flatly. You'll know by morning whether it's turned into something more. Martha walked past them without another word, her head held high, every step deliberate. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The silence behind her was victory enough. Inside the SUV, the leather seats smelled faintly of new upholstery and rain. A young communications officer handed her a secure phone. "Joint Command is on the line, ma'am." Martha took it, holding the device with the same steady grip she had once used for briefing folders, deployment orders, and presidential memos. "This is General Ellison. We have a situation." The voice on the other end responded immediately. "We know. We've pulled the body cam feeds and reviewed the initial call. The civilian who reported you was misinformed, but what the officers did, that's a different conversation." Martha didn't nod, didn't relax. "I want a full debrief logged and routed through legal. I don't want apologies. I want protocol." "Understood, General." She hung up. Not because she was finished, but because she needed 1 minute, just one, to breathe. Outside the tinted glass, rain had started again, soft streaks sliding down the windshield like quiet punctuation marks. The vehicle moved slowly through the garage and out into the Arlington night. Martha leaned back against the seat, eyes closed, breathing steady. She wasn't angry. She wasn't relieved. She was resolved. Because she knew this was only the beginning. The ride from the garage to her townhouse was short, no more than 15 minutes, but for Martha Ellison it stretched like an entire night. The black SUV slid quietly through the rain-slick streets of Arlington, headlights washing over stop signs and lampposts, still dripping from the storm. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. The 2 military police officers sat rigidly in the front, eyes forward, trained to be invisible until called upon. Agent Colin Red, seated opposite her, kept his gaze on the passing city lights, his silence heavy but not unfriendly. Martha leaned back into the leather, her wrists resting gently in her lap. The faint red indentations left by the cuffs pulsed with every heartbeat. She rubbed the skin absent-mindedly, not because of pain, but because of memory. The kind of memory that carved itself into bone. She had carried shrapnel scars from Kandahar that hurt less than this indignity. Her phone buzzed once on the console beside her. A secure line, already patched through. Agent Red reached for it, handed it across. "General, Joint Command has you." Martha accepted the handset with steady fingers. "Ellison," she said. On the other end, the voice was clipped, brisk. "We've reviewed initial footage. The call to local PD was vague at best. Civilian claimed a suspicious figure near vehicles. No description beyond gender and clothing. Dispatch forwarded without vetting." Martha closed her eyes for a moment. A hoodie, she thought. That was the crime. Not the laptop bag. Not the SUV. Not even her presence in a federal garage. Just a woman in a hoodie who didn't fit someone's picture of who belonged. The voice continued. "The officers escalated without proper ID check. Pentagon surveillance confirms your compliance at all times. We'll handle press containment and formal coordination with Arlington PD. I don't want containment." Martha said evenly. "I want protocol. I want process followed to the letter." "Understood. Office of Military Justice is already drafting a preliminary report. You'll have it in 2 hours." She hung up without pleasantries. Protocol mattered more than comfort. The SUV pulled to a stop in front of her brick townhouse in McLean. The porch light flickered once in the rain. Martha stepped out, nodded once to Red, and climbed the steps with her uniform coat draped over one arm. She did not invite them inside. She did not need company. What she needed now was silence. Inside, she set her coat on the back of a chair, poured a glass of cold water from the fridge, and stood at the counter staring at nothing. The kitchen clock ticked past 10 p.m. She hadn't eaten since noon, but food was the last thing on her mind. Her secure laptop sat waiting on the dining room table. She powered it on, logged in, and there it was. The preliminary report from the Office of Military Justice. She scrolled through pages of timestamps, body cam logs, annotated stills from garage security feeds. The language was dry, clinical, stripped of emotion. Subject identified herself by name and rank. Officers failed to verify. Subject remained compliant. Force used without probable cause. It should have been vindication. Instead, it felt like salt in an old wound. Her phone rang again. She recognized the voice instantly. Brigadier General Carson Blake, former Marine. Blunt as a hammer. "Martha," he said, "we've got press inquiries already. Somebody leaked a tip. 2 local cops detained a high-ranking Army official. They don't know it's you yet, but they will." Martha stood motionless at the counter. "Let them." "You filing a formal complaint?" Blake asked. "No," she said. Her voice didn't waver. "I'm letting the Pentagon handle it. I don't want headlines. I want consequences." Blake didn't argue. He knew her too well. After a beat, he said simply, "For the record, we've got your back." She hung up without ceremony. Back at the Arlington precinct, Maddox and Lang were sitting under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights in a cramped interview room. Neither wore cuffs, but neither looked comfortable. A woman in a gray suit entered, her heels clicking across the linoleum. She carried a thick folder, sat down, and introduced herself without fanfare. "Captain Ivan Delgado, Internal Affairs." Lang straightened in his chair. Maddox leaned back, arms crossed, jaw set. Delgado flipped a page. "Do either of you want to explain why you ignored direct identification from a federal official?" Lang fumbled. She didn't look like... she had a hoodie on. No ID out. We didn't know who she was. Delgado raised an eyebrow. "She stated her name and rank. She offered identification. She remained compliant at all times." Maddox clenched his jaw. "She was next to a black SUV. That's all we had. You'd have done the same thing." "No," Delgado replied without blinking. "I wouldn't have. Because I read reports. I verify identities. And I don't slap cuffs on civilians based on my gut." Maddox's face reddened. "You're making this about race." Delgado tilted her head. "I'm not, but the video is." The silence stretched. Lang dropped his gaze. Maddox stared straight ahead, still clinging to the only thing he had left, his pride. At her townhouse, Martha scrolled further into the report. Every second had been logged. Her calm warnings, Maddox's dismissive replies, Lang's hesitation, the exact moment her smartwatch triggered the Pentagon alert. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't resisted. She'd followed procedure, trusted protocol, and still ended up cuffed in her own parking garage. By Wednesday morning, both officers were on administrative leave. The Pentagon's legal department had issued formal notice to Arlington's police chief. The report was airtight. Footage, audio, timestamps. There was no wiggle room. That afternoon, the chief stood before cameras and delivered the kind of line every city official dreads. "We take this matter seriously and are cooperating fully with federal investigators." His tie was too tight, his eyes shifting like a man praying the story would fade. But it didn't. By nightfall, news anchors were reading aloud Martha's short, 6-sentence statement. "I did not ask for special treatment. I asked to be seen. I did not resist. I complied. And still, I was handcuffed, searched, and humiliated for simply existing. This is not just about me. This is about how many people don't get the chance to make a call that changes the outcome. I did. They didn't." The word spread faster than outrage usually does. Not because they were fiery, because they were measured, calm, precise. Lang watched the coverage from his garage at home, tears rolling down his face. His wife sat silently beside him, her hand resting on her belly, their unborn child shifting under her touch. He whispered over and over, "I didn't even touch her roughly. I didn't speak up." Maddox, meanwhile, ranted to his brother over beers. "It's overblown. People pull that card when they want to make noise. She's just another angry government type." But no one in his department echoed him this time. Not after watching the footage. Not after hearing the audio. Not after reading the general's words. And at her kitchen table, Martha sat with her morning coffee, the steam rising in quiet curls. She didn't smile. She didn't toast victory. She simply let the silence fill the room. Because silence, she knew, spoke louder than headlines ever could. The silence after Martha Ellison's statement didn't last long. By sunrise the next day, it had already become the storm. Television anchors read her words in measured tones, their voices dropping on the final line. "This is not just about me. This is about how many people don't get the chance to make a call that changes the outcome. I did. They didn't." In homes across the country, Americans set down their coffee cups and leaned forward. It wasn't outrage that caught them, not yet. It was the clarity. A woman who had been cuffed, humiliated, restrained without cause, was not shouting or demanding retribution. She was stating facts with a soldier's calm. And facts, delivered without embellishment, have a way of piercing louder than anger ever could. At Arlington PD headquarters, the walls were sweating. Internal Affairs had already completed the first round of interviews. The Pentagon's legal department had sent over a formal notice that could not be softened, delayed, or spun. The chief of police called an emergency meeting, his tie loosened, his voice low. "We can't bury this," he admitted, his hands flat on the table. "The footage is already in circulation. The Pentagon owns it. We're in damage control now." Half a dozen commanders sat around him, none eager to speak first. They all knew what that meant. Careers on the line, reputations shredded, trust in their department bleeding out faster than they could stitch it back together. Out in the suburbs, Sergeant Blake Maddox was still telling himself he'd done nothing wrong. Sitting at his kitchen table, beer in hand at 9 in the morning, he ranted to his brother over the phone. "She's blowing it out of proportion. You can't even approach people anymore without somebody screaming federal offense. I did my job. I followed my gut. That's what cops are supposed to do." But in the quiet of his living room, even Maddox could hear the thinness in his own words. He remembered the blinking red light of his body cam, the calm steel in Martha's voice, the way Agent Colin Red had looked at him as if he were already a dead man walking. He shoved the thought away, clung harder to his pride. Officer Trevor Lang, on the other hand, wasn't ranting. He was unraveling. At home, he sat on the floor of his garage, head in his hands, the glow of his phone screen illuminating Martha's statement. His wife found him like that, still in uniform pants, vest tossed aside, tears streaking down his face. I didn't hurt her," he whispered, voice cracking. "I just didn't stop him. I didn't say enough." His wife put a hand on her belly, their baby kicking softly beneath her palm, and said nothing. She didn't need to. Lang already knew the truth. Silence was complicity. By Wednesday morning, the hammer fell. Maddox was placed on administrative leave, pending termination. Lang was offered a choice: resign quietly or face disciplinary review that would almost certainly end his career anyway. After a night of pacing, staring at his unborn child's ultrasound taped to the fridge, he chose resignation. The chief of police stood stiffly at a press conference that afternoon, cameras snapping like distant gunfire. "We take this matter seriously and are cooperating fully with federal investigators. The actions of these officers do not reflect the values of this department." It was the kind of speech officials gave when their hands were tied, when they knew the real power had already shifted out of their building and into federal hands. On cable news, commentators debated the wider meaning. Was this another example of bias embedded in policing? Was it reckless pride, poor training, or something deeper? Retired generals were interviewed, all confirming Martha's reputation: decorated, disciplined, respected on both sides of the political aisle. The public didn't just see one woman's humiliation. They saw a pattern, one that had played out too many times, usually without body cams, without Pentagon alerts, without anyone powerful enough to demand accountability. In one corner of the internet, service members, black, brown, white, men and women alike, began sharing their own quiet stories. Stories of being questioned in uniform, doubted despite credentials, treated as suspects in their own neighborhoods. Martha's calm words gave them language they had never dared to use publicly. Meanwhile, Maddox grew more bitter. He told friends it was a witch hunt, told fellow officers it was just politics, told himself he was the victim. But the station house had changed overnight. Where once his swagger had commanded nods, now men avoided his eyes. Women whispered in corners. No one defended him. Not after watching the footage. Not after hearing the Pentagon's tone. Lang, in contrast, shrank from public view. He handed in his badge in a quiet office, slid his resignation across the desk without ceremony. His supervisor didn't scold him, didn't comfort him. Just nodded and said, "Better this way." Lang walked out with a cardboard box, the weight of his silence heavier than any disciplinary mark could have been. At her townhouse, Martha received the updates without celebration. A Pentagon aide called, informing her of the administrative leave, the pending terminations, the chief's press conference. Martha listened quietly, sipping her morning coffee, watching the steam curl upward. She said only 2 words when the aide finished. As expected. She didn't smile. She didn't exhale relief. She had been in this world too long to confuse discipline with justice. Discipline ended 2 careers. Justice required something more. Change. But that didn't mean the reckoning had no weight. In the silence of her kitchen, Martha allowed herself one thought she hadn't dared to entertain in the garage. They didn't see me, but they will remember me. That afternoon, across town, Internal Affairs Captain Yvonne Delgado filed her formal recommendation. Maddox, termination. Lang, resignation accepted. The paperwork was dry, clinical, devoid of rhetoric. But tucked inside, in Delgado's private notes, was one line that summed up the truth. The general never raised her voice. She never resisted. She followed every order. And still, they cuffed her. By evening, Martha's statement had gone viral. Celebrities reposted it. Clergy quoted it in sermons. Veterans groups issued their own supporting letters. What shook people most wasn't the outrage. It was the restraint. A woman who had faced down war zones had been humiliated at home, and she responded not with fury, but with dignity. In kitchens and living rooms across America, older veterans leaned forward in their recliners, nodding slowly. They knew the weight of restraint. They knew the discipline it took to keep your voice steady when everything in you wanted to roar. And for every nod, there was also shame. Shame from those who realized they doubted women like Martha, men like their neighbors, friends who didn't look like they belonged. Shame from officers who knew that, had they been in Maddox's shoes, they might have done the same. By Thursday morning, headlines no longer called it an incident. They called it what it was, a scandal. Maddox poured himself another beer at 10 a.m., the blinds drawn, the TV flashing images of Martha's calm face on every network. He told himself it would blow over, told himself he'd get his job back, told himself he hadn't done anything different than what any other cop would have done. But deep down, in the hollow silence of his living room, he knew. The joke wasn't on Martha. It was on him. The days after the press conference moved like shifting ground beneath a steady walker. For most, it was headlines flashing and sound bites recycled. For General Martha Ellison, 67 years old and seasoned enough to know the difference between spectacle and consequence, it was silence that mattered most. She had learned long ago, silence was where truth revealed itself. Her morning routine didn't change. Up before dawn, coffee brewed strong in the pot she'd owned for 20 years, her porch light flickering against the still wet pavement. She read her reports in the calm of early hours, hands steady, mind sharper than the pain in her joints would allow anyone to guess. And yet, despite her discipline, she felt the weight pressing in. Not from the bruises left on her wrists, not even from the cameras now orbiting her story, but from the knowledge that what had happened to her had played out countless times for people who never got a second chance. By Friday, she began receiving stacks of letters. Some typed, some handwritten, some scrawled in hurried penmanship from strangers who barely knew how to spell her name. They came from veterans, single mothers, young cadets, pastors, teachers. Some wrote thank yous, some wrote confessions, some wrote just to say they had seen her, and in seeing her, finally felt seen themselves. But one letter stood apart. It wasn't mailed. It was hand-delivered. Late Saturday evening, a quiet knock sounded at her front door. Martha opened it to find no one waiting. Only an envelope slipped beneath the welcome mat. No return address, no seal, just her name in block letters. General Ellison. She took it inside, set it on the dining table beside her coffee mug, and opened it with the same steady hands that had signed deployment orders and classified directives. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, the words pressing too hard into the paper as if written under duress. General Ellison, I failed to act. I froze. I followed when I should have questioned. I didn't see you, and for that, I am deeply sorry. I will carry this for the rest of my life. Trevor Lang. Martha read it twice, then a third time, her eyes lingering on the word sorry. She folded the paper neatly, slid it into the same drawer where she kept her father's old service pins and a faded photograph of him in uniform. She did not smile. She did not curse. She simply placed the letter with the rest of her history. Not erased, not forgiven, but remembered. The following Monday, Martha addressed a group of young cadets by video call. They were in uniform, eager faces lined up in neat squares across her laptop screen. Their energy reminded her of her own first days at Jackson State, when the world felt both impossibly heavy and brimming with possibility. I want each of you to remember something, she told them, her voice steady, her posture rigid even in the comfort of her townhouse. Your title may carry weight. Your ribbons, your stripes, your bars, they matter. But your skin walks in first, your face walks in first. People will judge you before you open your mouth, before they see your papers, before they read your record. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to decide how you'll respond. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from the second row of screens, a young woman raised her hand. Her voice trembled with the courage it takes to ask what everyone else is thinking. "Ma'am," she said, "were you scared?" Martha didn't answer right away. She took a breath, let the silence settle, then nodded. "Yes," she said plainly. "I was scared, but not for myself. I was scared that if I panicked, if I raised my voice or fought back, I'd confirm every lie they already believed about me. That's the trap. That's the cost. And it doesn't go away with rank. It doesn't go away with medals. It follows you. So you hold steady, because sometimes restraint is the only weapon they don't expect you to use." The cadets nodded, their eyes wide, their faces solemn. In that silence, Martha knew the lesson had landed. That same week, reporters tried to press her for interviews. Civil rights groups reached out, urging her to speak at rallies in Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago. Her inbox overflowed with requests for her voice on the issue. But Martha declined them all. "I don't need a microphone," she told a Pentagon aide. "I need accountability." Instead, she wrote quietly, an op-ed in The Hill, stripped of drama, focused on policy. Better training protocols, independent review boards, accountability at every level. No pictures, no photo ops. Just her words, crisp as her salutes had once been. At the Arlington precinct, Lang read her op-ed on his phone, alone in his garage. He reread his own letter to her, the one he had dropped under her doormat, and felt the weight tighten around his chest. He knew she would never respond, never grant him absolution. That wasn't her way. Forgiveness was cheap, Memory was expensive, and she had chosen to remember. Maddox, meanwhile, stayed defiant. In bars and backyards, he told anyone who would listen that the whole thing was overblown, that she had played the card, that it was just noise. But no one echoed him now. Not after the footage. Not after the Pentagon's words. Not after Martha's steady statement had echoed across the country. One evening, Martha sat on her back patio, coffee mug in hand, staring at the trees shifting in the twilight. She thought about Lang's letter, about the cadets' faces on the screen, about the countless voices that had written her in recent days. She thought about her father, repairing air conditioners in Mississippi summers, praying his children would never have to wear a uniform unless they chose to. She thought about how she had chosen, and how the world still refused to choose her in return. And in that quiet, she wrote her own note. Not for the press, not for Congress, not for any report. Just for her journal, where she rarely bothered to record thoughts. I did everything right. I followed orders. I earned rank. I served. And still, they didn't see me. But I saw them, and I will remember. The ink dried on the page. The lesson was not for her anymore. It was for those who came after, those who would walk in uniforms or suits or plain clothes, judged before they could speak, doubted before they could prove themselves. Her legacy, she knew, wasn't her stars on her shoulder or the clearances she carried. It was this, the lesson of restraint, the dignity of silence, the endurance of memory. And somewhere in a drawer, alongside her father's service pins, Trevor Lang's apology lay folded, not forgiven, not forgotten, but part of the story. Because every reckoning leaves behind a lesson. And Martha Ellison, who had faced down generals and presidents, wars and politics, knew that the hardest lessons weren't shouted. They were carried, quietly, in the silence that followed. The news cycle swirled for weeks. On the surface, it looked like another flash of outrage, another scandal to be consumed and replaced by the next headline. Pundits debated on evening shows, activists posted on social media, and columnists stretched the story into metaphors for everything broken in America. But General Martha Ellison refused to play that game. She had spent her life inside the halls of power, and she knew better than most that attention was fickle. Spotlights faded, headlines burned out. Policies, though. Policies left scars or remedies that lasted long after the noise died down. So when civil rights groups called, offering her the stage at rallies in Dallas, Atlanta, or Los Angeles, she politely declined. "I don't need a microphone," she told them in her steady voice. "I need accountability." Her aides pushed her. Younger officers begged her. Even a senator called, suggesting that her moment could be leveraged into national recognition. Martha listened to them all, sipped her coffee, and said the same thing. "You don't change a system by shouting at it. You change it by forcing it to rewrite itself." Behind closed doors, she got to work. At the Pentagon, she began meeting quietly with legal counsel and senior officials. Not grand speeches, not photo ops, just firm conversations about training standards, oversight mechanisms, and accountability structures that had been ignored for too long. She reminded them that what happened in that parking garage wasn't just about one bad call. It was about culture, and culture was shaped by policy. Independent review boards for use of force incidents, she said, her tone clipped but commanding. Mandatory de-escalation training, third-party audits of body cam footage. And I don't want it drafted as a suggestion. I want it codified. Some bristled, some resisted, but none could dismiss her. She wasn't just a decorated officer with decades of service. She was the living proof of the system's failure. Meanwhile, Arlington PD scrambled. The chief tried to soften the narrative, calling it a high-pressure misunderstanding. The union issued statements defending Maddox and Lang, arguing no malicious intent had been proven. Martha didn't bother to respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than rebuttal, her restraint louder than indignation. Every time a reporter asked for comment, she simply said, "Protocol is being followed." And the nation, already haunted by her six-sentence statement, leaned closer. Inside the department, reforms began to move faster than anyone had expected. Civilian review boards were convened. Body cam audits became mandatory. Rookie officers were retrained on the basics of probable cause, identification, and restraint. For the first time in years, Arlington PD was not writing its own rules. It was being forced to adopt rules written in the shadow of a general who had never once raised her voice at them. But Martha's influence didn't stop there. State legislators reached out, asking her input on broader reforms. She met them quietly, behind closed doors. No cameras invited. She didn't posture or campaign. She handed them detailed notes, annotated with the precision of someone who had written war strategies and cyber defense protocols. "You want change?" she told them. "Don't name it after me. Don't brand it. Don't turn it into a slogan. Write it so that the next person who gets cuffed in a garage doesn't need rank or clearance or a Pentagon trigger to be believed." Her words cut through the fog of politics like steel. Across the country, service members took notice. Some sent her letters. Others recorded quiet videos telling their own stories of being doubted, dismissed, restrained in places where they should have been respected. Martha read them all, not with sorrow, but with a soldier's discipline. Each account was another reason to keep pressing, another reminder that her story was not hers alone. One night, just after 9 o'clock, she returned to the Jefferson Tower garage. Same level, same pillar, same paint scuffs. The garage smelled of oil and damp concrete, the air humming with fluorescent lights. She stood at the exact spot where Maddox had pressed her into the wall, the memory still sharp in her wrists. But this time, no voices barked at her. No guns were drawn. No cuffs clinked against her skin. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo. Not for evidence, not for the press, not for anyone but herself. A private record of a place that had tried to diminish her, but failed. Back at her townhouse, she placed the photo inside her journal, beside the note she had written days earlier. "I did everything right. I followed orders. I earned rank. I served. And still, they didn't see me. But I saw them. And I will remember." Martha understood power better than most. She had seen presidents wield it loudly and generals wield it quietly. She had seen soldiers die because someone misunderstood it. And she had learned, painfully, over and over, that the deepest power was not in the shout, but in the silence that held steady when the world tried to rattle it. That was why she never filed a civil suit, never sat for an exclusive, never demanded the spotlight. Because the spotlight wasn't power, policy was. And policy was already changing because she had stood still, calm, and unshaken in a parking garage while others lost control of themselves. The irony wasn't lost on her. For decades, she had worn stars on her shoulders, carried clearance cards with Pentagon seals, briefed leaders who measured her words with national consequence. Yet none of that stopped two men from treating her like a suspect. What protected her in the end wasn't the rank or the stars. It was the discipline she carried, the refusal to break when breaking would have been easier. Martha sat once more on her back patio, the night air heavy with summer damp. She sipped her coffee, black, no sugar, and stared at the trees beyond her yard. In the drawer inside lay Trevor Lang's letter, folded neatly beside her father's pins. In it, a young man had admitted what most never do, that silence had a cost. She didn't forgive him, but she carried his words the way she carried all her scars. Not as wounds to reopen, but as lessons to pass forward. The country thought it had seen a scandal. Martha knew better. It had seen a lesson. And lessons, once learned, outlast the noise. By the time the storm of cameras and commentaries began to ebb, General Martha Ellison had already returned to her routine. The public wanted drama, wanted her face on the evening news, wanted another soundbite to fuel the debate. But Martha had no interest in becoming a symbol for someone else's story. Symbols flickered and vanished, lessons endured, and she was determined that this one would endure. The policies had begun to change. Arlington PD was now subject to independent oversight on all use-of-force cases. Body cam audits were standard, not optional. Civilian review boards had teeth, not just titles. Young cadets across the country were being shown her footage in training seminars, not as a tale of outrage, but as a case study in restraint, hers and theirs. Yet Martha never spoke of it publicly. She didn't file a civil suit, didn't write a book, didn't sit for an exclusive interview. When asked why, she gave the same reply. "I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in accountability." But accountability came in more ways than one. Sergeant Blake Maddox never wore the badge again. Termination was swift, his appeals denied without hesitation. He told friends he'd been railroaded, told family he was the victim of politics, but the silence around him grew louder than his rants. No fellow officers defended him. No union lawyer could erase the footage. His career ended not with gunfire or glory, but with paperwork that read terminated for cause. Officer Trevor Lang left quietly. He resigned with a cardboard box under his arm, a wife waiting in the car, and a future he no longer recognized. But unlike Maddox, Lang carried the weight differently. His letter to Martha, raw, honest, penitent, had not brought forgiveness, but it had brought truth. And truth, even when painful, has a way of shaping a man. He took a job in construction, raised his child, and lived with the knowledge that silence can wound as deeply as action. For weeks, the general's 6-sentence statement lived on television screens and phone feeds. It was read aloud in classrooms, quoted in sermons, dissected in editorials. What startled people wasn't its anger, but its restraint. I did not ask for special treatment. I asked to be seen. Americans who had grown weary of shouting recognized something rare in those words. Dignity under pressure, strength without spectacle. It was a lesson older generations knew instinctively, the kind forged in quiet battles where the only victory was survival, with your head still held high. And slowly, the story stopped being about one woman in a parking garage. It became about a culture, a pattern, a question asked in living rooms across the nation. How many more have lived this without a Pentagon alert to save them? Through it all, Martha carried on. Briefings, strategy meetings, late-night calls with overseas counterparts. Her work did not pause. The only visible reminder was the faint red outline still circling her wrists weeks later. She did not cover it. She did not hide it. When aides asked if she wanted makeup before meetings or photographs, she refused. "If they notice, let them ask," she said. One evening, she returned once more to the Jefferson Tower garage. The air was still, the concrete cool beneath her shoes, the pillar unchanged. She stood where she had been cuffed, folded her hands behind her back, and breathed in the silence. No one challenged her. No one doubted her. She pulled out her phone, took one last photograph, and tucked it away. Not for proof, not for memory, for resolve. At home that night, she opened her journal again, the one she rarely wrote in, the one that now held her note of remembrance and the photograph. She wrote slowly, deliberately. Power isn't in the shouting. Power is in the silence that refuses to break. Dignity doesn't need to prove itself. It waits. And when the world finally looks, it is undeniable. Months later, in lecture halls at military academies, cadets studied her case. In precinct training rooms, rookies watched the footage with instructors pausing at every frame. "Notice her tone," one instructor would say. "Calm, controlled, not escalating." "Notice theirs," another would add. "Dismissive, prideful, procedure ignored." For many, it was the first time they realized that restraint could be stronger than resistance, that silence could echo louder than rage. And across living rooms, veterans nodded knowingly. They had seen the truth of it before, in jungles, in deserts, in city streets. The ones who survived weren't always the loudest. They were the ones who held steady until the tide turned. Martha's name never became a hashtag. She never trended for long, and she was grateful for that. Because what lasted wasn't her face on screens, it was the reforms written into policy, the lessons taught in classrooms, the quiet conversations held in precincts and households. In time, people would forget the details. They'd forget the names of the officers, the exact garage, even the date. But they would remember the image. An old soldier, calm in cuffs, telling the world without shouting that dignity cannot be erased by arrogance. And that, Martha knew, was enough. On a late autumn morning, she stood on her porch with a steaming cup of black coffee. The air was crisp, the trees turning amber. Her neighborhood was waking up. A jogger on the sidewalk, a paperboy tossing the Washington Post, a neighbor waving as he loaded his truck. Ordinary life, humming forward as though nothing had happened. She thought about her father, who had prayed his children would never wear uniforms unless they chose to. She thought about her younger self, marching at Fort Benning, determined to know the rules better than anyone else. She thought about Trevor Lang's shaky handwriting, tucked in her drawer. And she thought about the cadets who had asked her the question she still carried. Were you scared? Yes, she had been scared, but not of them. She had been scared of herself, of losing control, of confirming the lies they already believed. And in conquering that fear, she had turned the tables. That was her legacy. Not the scars on her wrists, not the news coverage, not the reforms written in dry legal ink. Her legacy was restraint. Restraint wielded as power. Restraint that forced the world to look at itself. She sipped her coffee, the steam rising against the cool morning air. Sometimes the loudest lesson is the one delivered in silence. Lesson 1. Restraint is a form of strength. In a world that rewards loud voices and quick tempers, General Martha Ellison proved that true strength isn't always measured in volume, but in control. When her wrists were clamped in cold steel, she did not shout. She did not thrash. She breathed. She remembered training drilled into her bones decades earlier. Panic clouds judgment, but calm exposes truth. Too many people believe power means towering over others, raising their voices or tightening their fists. Martha showed the opposite. Power meant standing steady when others tried to shake her. It meant refusing to give her captors the outburst they expected. And in that silence, she shifted the weight of authority. Restraint isn't weakness. It is discipline sharpened into armor, and it often speaks louder than the loudest accusations ever could. Lesson 2. Dignity cannot be taken. Only surrendered Maddox tried to strip her of it. Lang looked away from it. The call that brought them came from someone who couldn't see it. But Martha carried her dignity like she carried her stars, not on her shoulder, but in her marrow. She complied with orders, gave clear warnings, identified herself, and never once let her fear turn to fury. She knew the trap. If she panicked, if she cursed, if she resisted, every prejudice in the room would be confirmed. Dignity, she understood, is not about how the world sees you. It is about how you refuse to bend when the world insists you're less than what you know yourself to be. She taught that dignity is not something another person can snatch in a heated moment. It's something you hand over, or something you keep, even in cuffs with cameras rolling. For Martha, it was never up for trade. Lesson 3. Policy outlasts headlines. The spotlight wanted her. Reporters called, activists begged, senators dangled microphones, but Martha turned away. She knew better. She had briefed presidents, written strategies that shaped wars, and seen firsthand how quickly America's attention wandered. What mattered wasn't her face on a screen, but her hand on the draft of reforms. She refused to sue for money, refused to chase applause. Instead, she demanded third-party reviews, new training modules, stricter protocols. Her 6-sentence statement wasn't just a soundbite. It was the seed of systemic change. And in time, it bore fruit. Reforms came, cadets studied her case, officers were retrained, and oversight was implemented. Headlines fade, scandals vanish. But policy, carefully written, relentlessly pushed, remains long after the cameras are gone. That was Martha's gift to those who came after. A system stronger than the one she endured, built not from outrage, but from resolve. What do you think, friends? After hearing General Martha Ellison's story, which lesson speaks to you the most? The strength of restraint, the power of dignity, or the lasting impact of policy over headlines? I'd love to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments. Hit that like button if this story gave you something to reflect on, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Every week, I bring stories like this that hold wisdom for everyday life. Lessons in courage, dignity, and change. Let's keep learning together.